Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Time has become soup for me. But I'm going to share my screen. We'll kick off with some updates from the Nnip team. We did have 4 people lined up to present today. However, our San Antonio partner doesn't have power and therefore cannot present today. So I told them we'll schedule them for the next one as well.
Great. Do you want to get started?
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So this is just your Urban Institute and Nnip staff. To remind you all, Kathy and Leah, you all probably know for a long time. And then me and Sonia, you see more often these days, helping run the network. And Alex helps with events and some of the background logistics. First thing we wanted to highlight for you all is we have a new partner in our network, Innovate Memphis. And we are having a social hour for them tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So we hope everybody can join us. We'll hear some from our new partner just to say hello. Yeah, just a quick introduction, and then kind of have a good social hour where people can chat since we've missed all your faces. This is a quick reminder. We have the Impact Award applications open right now. So we hope everyone, we know everyone has had great impact over the past year, particularly during COVID, and we hope you will apply with a story for the Impact Award. Kathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage people for this. I swear the application, we tried to make it a very, not a huge lift on the application if you're thinking that you're just too busy making impact to write about impact. I think the range of impact has been very some smaller, it might be neighborhood focused or it might be something citywide. So it's really about sort of the strength of the link between the sort of the data and the technical assistance that you've provided and sort of what happened, which can be of different scales and of different time periods. So we wanted, I think it's that the change happened in the last year, but we know that the data you might have actually produced the report 3 years ago that eventually made the change. So but we're very, very happy to talk to anyone if you have ideas about whether something would be a good idea to apply. This is not like a closed door process. So you should just call Leah and myself beforehand. And it is one of the main ways that we have a funnel for our stories that are on the Nnip website. Camille, can you just drop the story link into the chat sometime? So please think about applying, because we want to share the information share the impact you guys are all having. And we have set up the the review committee will be Chris Kingsley from Casey, George Hober from Robert Wood Johnson, a member of the executive committee, and then Maya Woluchem, who is an urban Nnip alum and also now at the Ford Foundation. Leah, do you want anything? I see Leah's on too. And there is no relationship between Chris and Tom. That is and I guess I should have said, I'm looking at many new faces. Tom Kingsley, whose name is on the Impact Award, was Nnip's founder and director for 20 years, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And he loved telling Nnip stories. This was his favorite, a career highlight was the stories document that he did in, I think it was in 2000 or something like that. So this was very near and dear to his heart, since he knew how important you all are to your communities. So the award is given in his honor.
Kathy, just two things. The email did go out to our official business list. If you didn't get it, that could be the reason. It might have gone to somebody else in your organization. And the time frame, as Kathy mentioned, when the work was conducted is open, but the impact should have occurred within the last 2 years, so 2019 or 2020.
Okay, good. Thank you. Great. I can just take this one too. Some of you are participating in the Robert Wood Johnson COVID grant program. We have a Medium blog where we've been posting a couple new entries every month, and we'll be sending a more detailed list of things, including there's one on data advocacy and disaggregation from Sonia. Camille wrote one on 2-on-1 data with like amazing help from the NNIP, other NNIP partners. So there's a lot of good stuff in there, both more advocacy that you might think of and practical. And we wanted to share that Sonia, Olivia Arena, who left us last fall, had been running the NNIP HQ Twitter, and Sonia has graciously agreed to take over because Lee and I are like not good at it. So, I try. Leah's not even on Twitter, so we need a younger generation to help us. So we're going to be sort of regrouping on Twitter over the next, which is NNIP HQ is our handle if you don't know. But if you want things that you want us to tweet, or you tweet at us if you want us to retweet something, so please think about using that too, or send an email to Sonia or nnip@urban.org to help us highlight more of your work.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we are going to jump right into our presentation so that we have plenty of time at the end for conversation. I have us up first with Trevor Matos from Boston Indicators.
Does that mean go, Camille?
Yeah. Well, yes. Are you ready to be our first presenter? Does that sound good?
Yes.
Sorry, I was
here.
laughing at the Jeff comment too.
Thanks, Trevor. Do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So I am going to share a little bit about a report that we released in summer of 2020, a guaranteed income for Massachusetts. Want to do a quick shout out because we worked with a number of different organizations on this. So shout out to the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, the Economic Security Project that played a pretty big role, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy that provided some tax modeling chops, and a local advocacy coalition, the Healthy Families EITC Coalition. So the motivation for the work is that, we live in the wealthiest country on earth, but there are way too many people that are struggling to get by, especially in a high cost region like Greater Boston. And we ought to be able to guarantee at least a basic standard of living for everyone. So one way to start moving in this direction is by overhauling the Massachusetts EITC, so that it begins to function a little bit more like a minimum guaranteed income. I'm sure a lot of people in this virtual room are well aware, but the EITC is the refundable tax credit given to low and moderate income working families that's been shown to reduce poverty, help improve health outcomes. So all kinds of good stuff associated with the EITC, but there's still ways to improve upon it, build upon it. So I'm going to quickly run through the 5 key reforms that we model in our paper that would provide a minimum credit of $1,200 to all households earning up to $70,000 a year, and often quite a bit more. So just bear with me while I do my screen share here. All right, hopefully you can all see that. Okay, great. Thank you, Camille. So for context, this is what the Massachusetts EITC looks like for a family with 2 parents, 2 kids, married, filing jointly. Of course, the EITC is phasing up with income, topping out or somewhere around 20K, and then phasing out completely by around $50,000 a year. So the first reform from our report is to increase the state match rate for the state EITC from 30 to 50%. This is a bump up that would just help everyone across the board, make sure that it can have a real impact. Reform number 2 is to establish a $1,200 credit for extremely low income families and even those with no income at all. And this is sort of acknowledging that the current structure of the EITC gives the least to those who really need it the most. And this reform challenges this assumption about deservedness, saying that regardless of your work status, you deserve at the very least, a basic standard of living. Reform number 3 is to extend the eligibility to middle income families earning up to $75,000 per year, which is, again, particularly relevant here in Greater Boston, where the median income is over $80,000 a year. So there's lots of people with more moderate incomes that are living paycheck to paycheck, just really struggling to get by. The fourth reform is to expand eligibility to several previously excluded groups. I'm just going to name a couple. One is unpaid caregivers, folks that are caring for dependents, children, elderly folks in their home without pay, but certainly doing extremely legitimate and important work and could really use the support. Another group is immigrants who pay taxes with an individual taxpayer ID number, an ITIN. These are folks that are helping to drive our economy, they're paying into the tax base, and they're often qualifying for little to no public supports at all. So could really use the support, especially in the context of COVID. And the fifth and final reform to our state's EITC is to increase the impact through free tax prep services and more frequent payments. So lots of people that claim the EITC do so through for-profit tax preparers, and they lose a bunch of that value. So we'd want to increase funding to volunteer income tax assistance sites, VITA sites, and also increase the frequency of the payments. So it's easier to families that want to integrate this support into their monthly budgeting so that it feels more like normal income. Put it all together, and what you get is almost 1 million newly eligible, newly supported individuals in the state of Massachusetts, a doubling of the average value of the credit. And it's worth just throwing out there that this, of course, wouldn't be free. It's coming in at roughly a cost of $1 billion. But as we point out in the paper, we point out a number of ways to fund it, and also just mention that that is roughly how much Massachusetts affords corporations and special business tax breaks on an annual basis. So that's sort of the idea and the impact in a nutshell. One of the most exciting recent developments is that we had a local state senator actually file a bill in the legislature that adopts nearly all of these provisions. And the one interesting distinction is that they chose to double essentially our minimum credit value of $1,200, making it $2,400 a year. So we are really excited to see that impact and see where it goes. Obviously, the legislative process is going to probably pick it apart and take it piecemeal, but it was just a really neat way to see the impact of our work. So thank you very much.
Wow, an exciting project. Thanks, Trevor. We are going to hold questions till the end for all presenters, but if you do have questions, please put them in the chat now and we'll bring them back up when we get to the Q&A section. So next I have Jeff Matson to present for us. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Great, take it away.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Good to see some old friends and new faces here today, and I'm really excited to share the project with you all that we've been working on for, I don't know, 6-7 months now. That's finally starting to be kind of rolled out and used a little bit more widely. So let me try and share my screen and see what happens when I start the slideshow. Okay. How's that look? You guys see it? Okay,
Beautiful.
great. So as many of you know, over the past year, we've been dealing with a lot in our city. And leading back to the week following the murder of George Floyd, which took place on Memorial Day of 2020, after several days of unrest, the city's Office of Emergency Management found more than 1,000 businesses or buildings had suffered damage of some sort, including 53 buildings that were completely destroyed, mainly by fire and other acts of vandalism. Significant damage occurred especially along one of our city's new recently established cultural corridors, which features hundreds of immigrant-owned businesses, restaurants, retails, services, grocery stores, kind of in this area in kind of the center of our city's kind of major commercial corridor, which is called Lake Street. This area's businesses are predominantly Latinx and East African, but also a number of Southeast Asian owned businesses and others. So as you might imagine, as recovery efforts began, there were a lot of people showing interest, many cooks in the kitchens, hands in the pot, local governments, CDCs, business associations, residents, business owners, really everybody wanted to know what was going on, have a say in what was going on, and it quickly became apparent that there was a need for kind of a central data repository. A number of organizations came to us specifically, the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers, which kind of organize our CDC community, the primary CDC that services this area, the Lake Street Council, and they were the ones that were kind of in charge of administering and monitoring all of the recovery funds that were coming in, which was quite a process in itself. And then our local LISC office was also engaged in kind of this work. And ultimately what they decided that they needed was a user-friendly mobile map that people could view, edit, update from the field as changes occurred along the corridors and as businesses started to recover. So the base map that we started with kind of contained three primary layers that made up the geographic hierarchy of the features we were dealing with. And this would be kind of at the top level, the businesses themselves represented by points. Then we had the buildings, and then finally under that we had the property parcels. As you might imagine, you've got some complicating factors in that many buildings would hold multiple buildings, many parcels would hold multiple buildings and or businesses, and sometimes you even had multiple parcels that housed one business or building. So there's this kind of coordination in all that, and kind of a big concern over duplication of effort, as well as kind of site control over these properties and these businesses and buildings. People weren't never quite sure who to deal with. Do I deal with the property owner? Do I deal with the business owner? Do I deal with the building manager? Do I deal with all three? Sometimes different organizations would be in contact with different entities on a single site. And so you end up with this kind of crazy kind of many-to-many relationship among all the players here. But we still were able to kind of put something together that we think is at least a little bit useful at this point. Here's what it looks like in a mobile app. This is from the Arcgis Collector app. And so users are able to go on their phones or their iPads, their tablets, whatever device they have, zoom into the area, click on individual businesses, and if their permissions have been so allowed, are able to edit any of the fields or features. There is even the ability to add new businesses if one was missed or one has kind of sprang up in the rebuilding, and a number of different fields that we're kind of tracking. We're looking at whether they rent or own the property. Is it a BIPOC owned business? Do they have insurance? Have they applied for any loans and grants? Most importantly to a lot of people, especially the public, is the business currently open right now? or do they have plans on reopening or rebuilding, and a number of other fields that aren't really shown here. One of the things I forgot to mention in the previous slide is that we also set up a number of different user groups and user views so that not everyone has access to all the same information. Only, for instance, the staff of a CDC might have access to the loan information. We don't want the public to know whether a business, received a loan or has applied for one or didn't receive one or whatever that status. So that was a process that took weeks, if not months in and of itself, just figuring out who had access to what fields and what layers and who could edit. And so not everybody can view everything, and even the things that you can view, not everyone can edit them. So we kind of made it through that hurdle, we think. Meanwhile, while this was going on, there was a professor in our school of planning who was working with a group of graduate students who were interested through their land use class in documenting some of the damage, kind of preserving for history and even for going forward what had happened. So they created this amazing website, minneapolispanorama.com or mplspanorama.com. I encourage you to go check it out. You pick the corridor you're interested in. You pick the orientation, whether you want to look north or south along the corridor. And then you use a scroll bar to just walk yourself down the street from one end to the other. This Lake Street corridor in South Minneapolis is approximately 6 miles long. And they documented the whole thing and stitched hundreds, if not thousands, of photos together. And so you're seeing not only the photos that they stitched together, but you're also seeing some information up above on the land use or zoning designation and whether you're within one of the cultural corridors. So as you slide along this corridor, these things will shift as you move in and out of different spaces. And then along the bottom, they're capturing the previous business, if it was destroyed, that business's address, and then kind of a symbol indicating the type of damage that had occurred on the business. So we've integrated these into the map as well. We've posted a series of photos attached to the building layer. And then we also have links to Google Street View from just prior to the unrest and the damage. So you're able to, again, click on a building and look at kind of both a before picture from Google Street View and then an after picture from Professor Berga's land use planning efforts. And so the hope is, that we will be able to preserve these and in the future add kind of reconstructed layers or photos as sites change, as buildings are rebuilt, as new businesses open or old businesses come back, and be able to kind of tell the story of what has happened along this corridor since this all began. What we have coming next is that this professor and his students are also very in tune with the needs of the community and collecting community stories. So relating kind of the needs and wishes and hopes of the area residents as buildings that need to be demolished are torn down and new things are built. We're also recognizing that the city's development goals and specifically their 2040 kind of built form development plan is oftentimes at odds with the needs of these communities. The city is pushing for higher density, mixed use buildings wherever possible, and all of this new construction, may make rents prohibitive for some of the small immigrant-owned businesses that used to occupy some of these spaces. This corridor kind of sprang up because it was away from the central business district and some of the high-income parts of the city. Rents were cheap, space was available, and there was kind of a kin community around to provide support and customers. And so there's real concern, that will be changing going forward, given all of these factors. So that's, I think that's the last, yep, that's the end of the show. Stop my sharing if I can figure out how to do that. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jeff. Those pictures are really powerful, seeing the before and after. All right, we are going to move on to Jeff Williams, and then we'll move to questions for everybody.
Certainly, thanks. I'd say as a former resident of very South Minneapolis, just a couple blocks off Lake Street, and a proud graduate and alum of the Humphrey School, and another person named Jeff. I really like that prior presentation. So wanted to chat with you all today about, find my screen, Community Insight, which is a new data platform that colleagues at the Johnson Center have created. We wanted to talk today about kind of the process, kind of the under the hood. This has been a couple of years in iteration because we hope by May or June this year to be coming back to the showcase and showing you all the site itself. So wanted to walk through kind of some of the background of it. Dashboards is one of the things the Johnson Center has done for quite a while. And I'm pleased, I think I saw both Brian, our senior web developer, and Adriana, our senior database developer, and good folks with NNIP on the call today as well. We had a site called Community Profiles back in 2011. And I just put some screenshots on here, a very flat site, very local, kind of static data reports that came out. And of course, a couple of years later, we did some additional development and came out with Community Profiles 2.0 that had a more interactive map. As you all know, and as again, preaching to the choir here, websites are great, but they grow like kudzu. And over time, one dashboard begat 3 dashboards, begat 7 dashboards, written by 4 different programmers on 6 different servers, and just got to kind of be a mess. So 2 years ago, a group of folks at the Johnson Center got together and said, we've got to bring a little bit of order to this chaos. Our technology is getting a little out of date in terms of the language. We're also getting a lot of requests, again, 2 years ago, to disaggregate the data at all times. So any data that was available by gender, by race, by age, by different demographic characteristics, people were asking us to kind of have that filter earlier or more prevalent on the dashboard instead of kind of buried or sometimes not offered at all. So this has been a labor of love. I've been with the center only for about a year. So this was all in process. And I'd like to say my contribution was coming in as a new director, getting briefed on this project and saying, this is great, keep going and tell me when it's done. I didn't want to interrupt the process going forward at all. Lots of NNIP members were very helpful in the early days. As the team kind of gathered, best practices, lessons learned, bear traps that others had stumbled into so that we could avoid them. Architecture began in very early winter of 2020. A lot of interviews with stakeholders, foundations, local units of governments, a lot of user testing basically took us during the early days of the pandemic, and in some ways kind of helped us because a great way to view a website is to do it virtually, instead of gathering people in computer labs around the university. So we had a lot of more virtual feedback in, and we started data loading in the fall. So this has been a 2+ year project that's just coming to fruition now. So a brand new website, the alpha exists, we're loading some data, and kind of its purpose in life is for the people that want to get kind of straight to the data, but you always want to see it different ways. So interactive maps that display different data layers, that's on the left. Any map we immediately then show 3 different ways with trend data. That's the line charts in the upper right, bar charts that disaggregate, and then we allow people to download that data straight away. So download into CSV as well as export any of these images. You can also kind of save or freeze any of these dashboards and share them via links as well. So pretty excited about that. We are loading about a dozen or so variables from the American Community Survey nationwide. We're also loading the CDC Social Vulnerability Index nationwide to get just some kind of variation within our ACS data. And then one of my research interests is basically all things nonprofit. So we're loading to the website through the business master file, basically a pin on the map for every nonprofit in the United States. And by every, we mean every. So this is everyone that has a tax ID certification. And we can link that information back over the next year or so as we build this out. We've also accumulated a 30-year trend file of 990 filings. So we'll be able to show kind of the growth and change of the nonprofit sector across these maps as well. Where we're headed to next, we're kind of locking down what we're offering, kind of the deeper and richer data set in and about the Grand Rapids area and the neighborhoods that we directly serve. We'll have kind of a similar data at the state level in Michigan, and then also a set of data that's nationwide. Our goal is a public beta launch. April 28th is the magic date. So we will take all of the good wishes and everything. The data loads continue on schedule and that the site comes up. Another important piece for this is, again, part of the Community Insight platform is both letting us publish our public data, as well as bringing all of the kind of client-facing dashboards under one infrastructure. So as we load data to Community Insight, it's instantly available to both our public and private sides, and different data layers will be coming on as we add additional clients. And of course, we're waiting with bated breath, like many of the rest of you, for the Census 2020 data. Sometime between now and 3 years from now, it sounds like, but we'll have a platform ready. And we're in partnership discussions with Data Driven Detroit, our NNIP partner on the east side of the state that also does a lot of dashboard and census work. We're jointly looking at loading the census data to our two websites at the same time and kind of dividing the state so that we have similar information available to both of the neighborhoods in kind of the big focus areas in Michigan and Detroit and Grand Rapids within a couple weeks of the data being released. So we've got a coordinated release and also working across the states in a single ask to foundations as we go forward. So that was the goal today, was just to kind of do some behind the scenes discussions of the process that we're going through. And we look forward to sharing the actual platform and the instrument itself with the demonstration by Brian, hopefully this summer at a mutually convenient time.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're going to move on to the questions phase. So please add questions in the chat or you can unmute yourself. But I'm going to start one off with Jeff Williams. I know, Jeff, you had mentioned that you have had conversations with community partners as well about what data to load. Can you give us a little bit more information on kind of how they've informed what you're working on now with the data?
Yeah, so we wrote out a plan of kind of a short, medium, and long-term meeting, 1 to 2 months of data load, kind of a 4 or 5 month schedule, and over the next year. And I think it probably had 24 different data sets, data sources, geographies on it. We took that list around to 4 or 5 different community stakeholder groups. It was fascinating to me is on a Friday in December, we had a meeting with just, it's my fellow data geeks. It was a hardcore everything data local group. And the very next morning on a Saturday, we met with a very grassroots community group in a neighborhood in the city of Grand Rapids. Both of those groups, the data geeks and a grassroots community group, looked at our list, drew a circle around what we had prioritized as like number 17 and 18 and said, start here. So they completely reorganized our data load list. So we're being responsive both to the data community and the neighborhoods to speed up the data. And they were the ones that pushed us on both the social vulnerability index as well as the 990s. We had kind of deprioritized those thinking, oh, everyone's seen them and it's not something we need to load. And both of those groups circled those and said those would be incredibly powerful to get sooner rather than later. So we basically flipped our development cycle around and are starting there.
Wow, that's interesting of how you've been working with your partners to really figure out what's going to be most valuable.
Yeah, and I think, Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything on the focus groups that you had done kind of earlier last year on the user interface and a lot of the design choices we made as well.
Yeah, the early conversations, there was a lot of talk about just wanting the general ACS sort of data and a pretty high focus on education, which we didn't have in our older platforms. So that's been a big priority for us in this early sprint.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to a question for Trevor. Which organization started with this idea? How did the collaboration with all those organizations come together?
Sure, yeah. Great question. It was a little bit of wrangling of lots of different people. The Economic Security Project has had this idea. They refer to it as the cost of living refund to overhaul. I think they have different versions, both for the federal EITC and they have a model version for states' efforts. And they were connected to this local coalition, the Healthy Families EITC Coalition, which is based at Children's Health Watch, which is based at Boston Medical Center. And Boston Indicators, that's us, is connected with the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, who's a member of that coalition. So we started talking to the Mass Budget and Policy Center. We were interested in guaranteed income, UBI type of stuff. And one of our contacts at the Mass Budget and Policy Center said, hey, we're talking about all kinds of cool EITC reforms at this coalition. And the coalition had been behind prior successful wins, boosting the match rate from 15% up to now 30%, which is one of the highest in the country. And they have deep connections to some of the more progressive legislators that have been interested in these types of expansions, to I-10 holders, to folks that are providing care in the homes, to low-income college students, and a whole, younger childless or folks without children, as well as older adults that are income eligible, but currently due to age restrictions wouldn't qualify. So we kind of got connected, and just given that that Boston Indicators is based at the Boston Foundation, we have this really nice platform, the foundation being a big sort of civic leader in the region, such that it made sense for us to sort of be a central node in the partnership. And then the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy had just been sort of modeling all these things for the Economic Security Project. So we were able to get custom estimates for Massachusetts and do a couple different scenarios to get a sense for how things would play out. So that's a lot, but hopefully answers the question.
Yeah.
Kathy?
Oh, no, I know sometimes the institutional part feels as hard as the technical part, so.
Definitely. Yeah, we're just blessed with good partners and people that, were really passionate about the work. So it came together. Yeah.
And I'm going to take moderator privilege, Trevor. Can you talk a little bit more about how data really came as a part of this this advocacy piece? Like, was it a major part in like selling the importance of this, or was the background a major aspect of the proposal?
I think that, one component that I didn't speak to at all, which is pretty critical, is that, the EITC disproportionately supports people of color in our state, and we have massive inequities here in Boston, Greater Boston. So that was a really important part of the framing, of the context, of the motivation. In terms of the way data has played a role more recently, and I think what you're sort of getting at, tell me if I'm wrong, Camille, is like with the new sort of legislative efforts. So like we've been a part of these conversations through the coalition with the state legislators, and sort of provided a little bit of maybe technical consulting and put together some charts and graphs and modeled out certain scenarios so that they would get a clearer picture, and sort of help write that into the actual bill's language. So.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think it's something we want to highlight with our partners, how we're tying the data into the advocacy parts to kind of help other people think about how to move from that data to advocacy. I had a question for Jeff Matson. I'm going to start, I think Bob's is first. Did you have any issues with Collector? Did people do data collection need to have an ArcGIS account, or could you set up the tool up for crowdsourcing?
Yeah, so there's a answer in the chat, but I'll answer too here. Yeah, our original intent was to just have some kind of generic accounts that people could use and go in, but that was proving to not really work. So we have had to go through the process of setting up ArcGIS online accounts for everyone that wants access to be able to edit. You don't need access to view. And for now, that's okay, because we do need some kind of authoritative control over the edits. Down the line, if we want to get more people involved, we might have to do some kind of online form submission where it can then be reviewed, and then someone that has access is able to update. So it's not ideal, but yeah, we have had to deal with that.
Thanks, Jeff.
Another question for you from Sonia. Did you find that the destroyed properties created associations of Black Lives Matter as violent and perhaps feed anti-Black sentiment? Did this affect your work in any way?
So we haven't felt that very strongly here. It's been widely recognized to this point that most of the people that were involved with the actual destruction of properties had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, and were kind of outside agitators, right-wing lunatics that were trying to start trouble. I think, all but just a handful of all of the arrests that happened in the months afterwards were people that weren't from the city. And so there has not really been any type of backlash or any, resistance towards rebuilding efforts or helping these businesses out. The community is really coming together to try to support everyone who was affected.
That's interesting. Thank you. I see a question for Brian H. Did you see any challenges for the grassroots groups around more having complicated interfaces?
I'm assuming we're speaking about user interfaces with this?
Yeah.
Okay,
I was just thinking like the map and the chart, and there's like just a lot going on there.
Yeah,
I mean, it's small, so I couldn't see it totally.
That's a great question. It's something that we focused on in the early group interviews, because my original design actually did not have 4 data visuals all at once. Because even to me, I'm not a power data user. It's a little overwhelming. There's a lot happening on the screen. And so we kind of asked folks, do you want to see it all at once? Or this other design was one by one. You start with the map and you can maybe jump into a trend chart. And to my surprise, from every stakeholder group, they said, yes, we want everything in front of us. So, okay, we can certainly build it that way. But we kind of put a few things in to help with that. You can maximize one to kind of hide the others. You can shuffle things around so there's a little more real estate in one of those containers. So we tried to kind of meet somewhere in the middle and keep it clean and elegant, but give them ultimately what they were after.
And a lot of flexibility. I don't know. I'm thinking of, the few of us who are still thinking back to Weave. So the PTSD on Weave interfaces, which were, with the scatter plots, and people just had a hard time with them.
There's a lot going on in those.
So I have another question for Jeff Matson. You put a slide on kind of what's next already, but I was curious if you have more thoughts on how kind of this moment can either promote or dissuade equitable development. Can you talk a little bit about what you're hoping comes out of this, what could come out of this, and what concerns also might arise?
Sure, thanks. So the big concern is kind of, who gets to operate businesses or be in these spaces once the redevelopment happens, and, who are receiving these recovery funds. Oftentimes it's the people who are connected, who are more savvy in, navigating, whether it be local government administered grants or connected to the big CDCs that are in the area. So our hope is that our connections with the students and the professors in the planning school who are trying to document community stories and change stay integrated in this work, and that we find more ways to kind of put these stories, kind of build this thing out so that it not only just contains the hard data, but that it also, so that the stories are kind of integrated somehow in a way so people can really see, not only what was there, but what the needs and the desires are. It was a concern almost from the beginning. We're already afraid that it's starting to get away from us as, bulldozers are coming in, and, landowners have, the law in our city says that, existing property owners have the right to, rebuild something exactly as it was on a footprint if it was destroyed. So if there was an auto parts store and maybe wasn't really serving the, needs of the community, the owner of that property has the right to put an identical footprinted auto parts store or whatever his business was on that site. So kind of working through those challenges, as well as, the desires of the city to see development I don't think that's going to end. And I don't have a great way of keeping track of all this, but, we're trying to collect as much of this data as we can to keep that going forward. Yeah,
sure. What has been some of the response from the city that the city wants to see for development in this area?
Yeah, they've been a little slower to kind of, I guess given the COVID crisis as well, and their own budgetary concerns, that's kind of slowed things down a little bit from their side, which has given us kind of an advantage and given us time to either do more organizing or do more outreach to community groups. They're generally supportive but are also very cautious in kind of endorsing, any solutions that we're proposing at this point. The recovery has been going pretty slowly. It's still been mainly a process of clearing kind of old, buildings that are no longer habitable. So it's going to be a number of years, I think, before we kind of fully see what happens.
Great, thank you for sharing. I have another question for Jeff Williams and team. Are you planning on training series for your new website? And if so, what kinds?
Yeah, we're going to see kind of if there are a couple of client organizations, we may start there, and we're in some discussions with that side. We're also looking at, because the Johnson Center also does trainings and capacity building workshops, professional development for nonprofits, what a pathway that way is as well. Brian has also built into the site kind of almost a YouTube-like video vignette. So we also plan to do a lot of the training of recording walkthroughs of the different use cases. We're hoping we've got a foundation funding type partner that's interested in launching something quickly in Community Insight. We've got a local neighborhood organization, and we've got actually an organization on the east side of the state. So we're hoping that kind of from some of the early customers and clients, we can capture some of the use cases and immediately put those onto the site to, again, show everyone what's there. Another piece too is part of kind of the agreement when we have a customer, the agreement will be, unless it's private data, once we load the data, it goes on every dashboard as an available layer. So we're also kind of to help build that flywheel of the more data that gets into the platform, the more data that's available to anyone that's already on the platform, either from the public side or the client side.
We have a question from Bob. How did you fund your profiles?
Who paid?
Yeah, so community profiles, I think it was, Brian can correct me, I think a lot of it was just university general support. We also got money from the university to rebuild into Community Insight. There were a couple of projects that kind of paid for specific profiles and some individual clients, and that's what we're trying to kind of also try to draw a tighter bundle around. Some of the dashboard projects got just very pricey, like almost absurdly high. So we're trying to also bring that cost back down to make them more accessible. Brian, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, Community Insight was fully funded, at least the first phase of funding by the university. If we go back to the older projects, I think 2.0, the old Community Profiles 2.0 was from the Dyer Ives Foundation. And I'm not sure about the original, those predate me.
Probably also from Dyer Ives. If
Likely.
I was there before you guys started, so.
Great. I'm going to do one last call for questions, and then we'll wrap it up with just a couple more thoughts from the network. This has been a really rich conversation. Thank you all.
Camille, can I do a quick plug?
Oh, yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I sent it out by email to everybody. We're doing our event tomorrow morning around data collaboratives. And I figured like our audience is local, but y'all would benefit. So feel free to join. I'm going to just throw it in the chat again.
Is it software collaboratives or data?
Software collaboratives.
Or is it the same thing?
It could be data and software together is the way I see it. But yeah, I have a copy of their draft report that I looked at. So it's more about like organizations coming together to talk about technology for the most part and shared governance. And so I thought it's really relevant to everything that we all do.
Great, thank you. Yes, please add it to the chat. So just to close us out, we wanted to remind everyone that there's many ways to participate in the network. Certainly submitting updates online of recent partner activities to the NNIP website. Recognizing and promoting the network in your presentations to local and national audiences, submitting annual updates to our local data inventory. Thank you all for submitting for the last one. Attending our annual meetings. That's been on our list, but we are hoping to have some virtual some virtual programming this year as well. So hopefully we'll see you all there. And then, of course, we have NNIP on Twitter. So please let Sonia know how we can promote your work as well, and tweet at us. And there is a participation handbook for those of you who are new that gives you lots of ideas.
It's a handout. Don't worry. It's not a whole book, just one page. Don't scare them.
Not a handbook, excuse me. But we are always looking for presenters for these showcases and other events. So if you have cool projects you want to highlight, or really exciting things going on, please let us know. We would love to host you to tell the whole network about it.
And I'll just do one more plug, Camille, that we are working on a couple of requests connected to participation on the self-reporting your participation, which we don't always catch what you know. So that's actually been really successful every year. And then also reporting out which partners have been helping you, how you've been helping each other. That feeds into the Network Steward Award. So over the next 2 or 3 weeks, you'll be getting those emails asking for information on that, because it really helps us. It helps us understand the network. It helps us make sure that people get credit for the time and generosity. And it also helps us as we report back to our funders too.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's been a really great presentation. I'm so glad to see your all faces. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.